All right, guys, welcome back. Today we have Nick with Found North. He's the founder. We got some whiskeys to go through. We're going to talk about everything they're doing, and we're going to have a good time. Let's get into it. Nick, I forgot to tell you there was actually two intros. I'm sorry. I kind of jumped down
They're
on
both
you there.
awesome, so I was really enjoying it.
Okay,
If there's
cool,
a third,
cool.
just let's go.
There,
Keep it going.
will be. I'm going to randomly stop you in the middle and be like, "No, we got to do another intro." No, it's so weird. People like. I have another intro which is a lot longer. People actually are like, "Hey, let me send you an intro. Let me send," which is I'm gracious because I don't know how to do any of that crap. So, let's get started. For one, you sent over a couple of samples, and I really want to get into these. I was able to try a sample of y'all's. I said it was batch 21, but I think it was 2. I don't remember. I
right.
think it was 2. Yeah, because I don't think you're at batch 21 yet, but
No.
still. So and it was amazing. So which one of these did you want to open up first, or I can open up 2 and we can get one airing out? It just depends on you.
Yeah. I would. I'd actually like you to open batch 5 for sure.
That's fine. Okay.
And we'll try that one.
Okay.
And then if you don't mind opening batch 10, that's a sample pull that we took directly from the tank. So batch 10 hasn't been vatted yet.
Okay.
And sometimes we find with tank samples that they benefit from a little air. It's a funny thing working in the industry the way I have, where I started kind of on the retail side and the customer facing side, and then I got into production. There was a lot of stuff that I always used to think were sort of nonsense superstitions about whiskey when I was on the retail side, and some producer would say, "Oh, this happens," and I'd say that's just scientifically that doesn't hold true. That doesn't hold water. And then you get on the production side and you get totally superstitious about everything.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit, and then we'll get into the story. But I wanted to get something in the glass because I told you a little bit of my backstory, and I need a little drink right now. So tell us a little bit about batch 5. It's aged 8 years and 58.1% alcohol. So tell us a little bit about that.
So this is a 2 whiskey blend. So this is a blend of 27% of this blend is 8-year-old wheat that was aged in New American oak. The other 73% of this whiskey is 21-year-old corn. It spent 13 years in ex-bourbon, and then it was transferred into New American oak for the latter 8 years of its maturation. The funny thing about this whiskey was the first 4 batches that we made were incredibly arduous to make. One of them took well over 100 different test blends, which is a lot. Because you think, oh well, it's only 100 different whiskeys, but you're trying them next to each other over and over again. So if you do 100 test blends, you've tasted 500 whiskeys. It's like it took us months.
Absolutely.
And this was one of those really rare instances where we had an idea and we tried it out and it worked, which almost never happens. Sometimes you try something out and it sort of works, and then you tweak it for days, weeks, months, and eventually you get somewhere good. This was 3 test blends. So the thesis behind this whiskey was really simple. Canadian whiskey is made by doing 100% corn, 100% rye, 100% wheat, 100% barley, fermenting, distilling, and aging them separately, and then blending together at the end, right? And so you control the grain ratio and you control the inputs as a blender, which is really why it's so much fun. And so the idea behind this whiskey was really simple. We had an 8-year-old wheat in New American oak. It was very delicious. It was very jagged. It had a lot of sort of sharp angles. And we had this incredibly old corn that was really balanced and had this really lovely, deep, rich foundation, a lot of texture. And we said, well, what if we took a kind of an unruly, younger 8-year-old wheat and we laid it on top of this foundation of 21-year-old corn? Could we get sort of the best of both worlds? Could we get the really lovely wheat character that you get from the grain in wheat, but still have the depth and the complexity that comes with just time in a barrel? and we tried it at 70-30, and then we tried it at 75-25, and then we split the difference, and it was perfect for us. And we were like, holy moly, let's just bottle this thing.
Right, absolutely.
And it was a really fun whiskey. And it was a whiskey that people kept asking us if we would do again. And the problem was we didn't have the wheat. So it's something of it's one of the whiskeys that we get emailed about the most. It's like, hey,
really? Okay.
I tried batch 5, and that's funny because most of our whiskeys are older. This is by far the youngest age statement whiskey we've done. Our first batch was 16, our second batch was 16, our third batch was 17, 18, then an 8-year, then an 18, then a 19, then an 18, then a 20, right? And it's like,
yeah,
you get the idea.
Yeah, I get it.
But this became a fan favorite.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I can tell you guys, and the ones that are listening, and this will go on YouTube as well. I don't know if I told you that, but the ones that are listening, the color on it is beautiful. The nose is I don't know how to explain it. Like, I've had quite a few Canadian whiskeys, and they're all really light and subtle. But this one, since I guess it was aged in new oak, it's given some nice barrel influence with it, which is really nice. The high corn content makes it think like it's a sticky bourbon, but it's not. But it has some really fruity notes and really almost floral and stuff like that. So it's a great pour so far, and I've just barely had a small little sip of it. And I did open batch 10 just to let it air out a little bit while we continue talking, because you asked me to.
Yeah, so it's funny that you say that, because we make exclusively Canadian whiskey. You asked me before we started, right. Hey, where are you right now? And I'm in Boston. Right. And our entire team is from the U.S. We're located. All of us are in the Northeast. Okay. So we're in Boston and New York and Connecticut, and we get asked kind of, especially by Canadians. Canadians email us all the time and say, hey, why are a bunch of American guys making Canadian whiskey? Which is totally fair.
Yeah, and that is fair.
There are two reasons. One is it's optimized for blending Canadian whiskey, which means as a non-distilling producer, we get to have a lot of control over the flavor profile and over the final product, which if you're buying from MGP, there's only so much you can do to the whiskey, because they've already got you're buying a mash bill. You've basically already locked yourself into certain grain ratios and so forth. And so that was one piece, but the other piece was, the Canadians do an incredibly good job of making really great distillate, which is, as someone who has been working in the industry for 10 years and a fan of the whiskey category for substantially longer than that. Canadian whiskey was never what I grabbed or gravitated to at all. If 10 years ago you had told me I was going to be working as a Canadian whiskey producer, I would have laughed you out of the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the reason was, most Canadian whiskeys that I've ever grabbed are exactly what you just described. They're lighter in profile. They're often 40% alcohol by volume or 80 proof. And as a result, I never really understood that the Canadians were making really good distillate. And the reality is that they make whiskey to sell to the masses, and they do a good job of it. They do a good job of it from a financial standpoint. That's for damn sure. Canadian whiskey is the number one selling whiskey in the United States from 1855 until 2010. And it's still the number one selling whiskey on this continent. So they're selling so much inexpensive, very, very easy to drink, not super complex whiskey. But the reality is that they actually make really good distillate. They just rarely bottle it at strength. They rarely blend it to have a bigger, bolder profile that we have come to love in the U.S. with our bourbons and our ryes. And they actually, as you pointed out very aptly, they rarely use new wood. So one of the biggest things that we've done is we constantly are buying old distillate from Canada and immediately re-racking it into new oak or new barrels.
Yeah.
And we just
That's awesome.
we get the benefit of time that we get from the oxidative reaction from the whiskey being in wood for a long time. But then we can start getting some of the extractives and some of the richer, stickier, lovely new oak characteristics that we, as big fans of American whiskey, are actually really fond of.
Right, right. So I guess my startup question, my follow-up question to that is, and this is a question I ask a lot of people: why produce whiskey? Why? I mean, you obviously didn't start out there. What kind of brought you into the company, and did all that? Give me that backstory a little bit so that we can kind of get our foot in.
Yeah, so it's really, so I co-founded this company with my brother, and my brother and I started working. I was actually telling this story to somebody the other day. When I was still in college down in North Carolina, my brother was moving out from Boston out to San Francisco, and he drove down to Davidson, where I went to school, and he picked me up on a Thursday night, and we drove together across the country. This was spring of my senior year. And he put me on a plane in Denver so I could make it back to class. I didn't have class until Tuesday, so put me on a plane 4 days later. But while we were driving, he was talking to me, and he was like, what are you doing when you're getting out of school? And I said, I don't know. And he said, you should move out and start a company with me. And I was like, really jacked, he's my older brother, and I admire him to this day and love him to death. And I was like, yes, I'm going to do that. So I graduated from college, and we moved out, and we tried to start a tech company, and good gracious, did we get our teeth kicked in. We got our ass whipped like you wouldn't believe, trying to start. I mean, we were so green. It was kind of silly. And what I quickly discovered was that I didn't love tech. I didn't love tech because everything was so fast paced all the time. And what at the time I was doing was I was just, as a hobbyist, really getting into whiskey. I'd always liked whiskey. I'd liked whiskey since I was 16. And I was really getting interested in whiskey. And a friend of mine basically saw my whiskey collection and asked me if I could host a professional whiskey tasting for her company. And I kind of said, sure, why not? I'm looking for a new job. I don't know what I'm doing here, and I'm kind of interested in this category of this thing. And I started studying it, and I was getting really ready for my big presentation. And I fell in love with whiskey. And I actually flew out to Scotland a couple months later, and I hitchhiked Scotland and went to 40 distilleries in 30 days, pretending to be a whiskey writer. And when I got back to Boston, I moved home to Boston. And when I got back to living with my parents, because I had no money, I got a job as basically a director of a really great chain of retail stores, a whiskey director for Gordon's, which is based in Boston. And I sort of learned the ropes and got myself into the industry over the next couple of years. And then when I started to have a feel for just the ins and outs of it, I started a consulting firm with my brother a couple of years later. We kind of said, well, let's take a swing at this again. And it really just dovetailed from there until we launched Found North. But so to answer your question, in a way, I stumbled drunkenly into this industry. But I think what drew me to it from the very beginning was how invested the people who work in the industry are in the category, in taking the time. The contrast between working in tech and what I was learning about whiskey. You were just saying, right before we got on here, that Jimmy Russell is, what is he, 70 years in this business
70
now?
years in the business. Yeah.
And I find that to be really cool. I remember when I was working in retail, one of the Bowmores, a 50-year-old Bowmore, won like a bunch of awards. And I was reading about it, and I believe I read that everyone, when it won all the awards after it had been bottled, everyone who had been involved in making the whiskey was dead.
Oh gosh.
And it gives me goosebumps, to be honest.
Absolutely.
It's like people who are that invested in something that has been intertwined with the world and with people and with culture and just for centuries.
Absolutely.
That's what drew me to it. And I think what makes me so excited about Canadian whiskey and working with Canadian whiskey is a category that in my mind feels dormant. It feels like they haven't done much different in the last 40 or 50 years.
Right.
It's a category that has a ton of history and an incredibly well-developed technical expertise. They do single distillation, they do double distillation, double in column, pot into column. They do single pots. I mean, like every type, style, production they do absolutely everything. Right. And they've been homing these skills for decades. And then they just don't make what we're drinking. And so there's something really exciting for me about the prospect of making a whiskey pioneering is not the word.
Right.
I think the word is just adventuring into the category in a way that brings people closer to Canadian whiskey. And frankly, we know that there are now eyeballs on us in Canada. And that's both scary because we don't want to be competing for the old supply.
No.
But it's also very exciting because it means that people are paying attention up there to what we're doing. And it, I would really welcome more producers in the category taking premium Canadian whiskey more seriously, because I do think you can make it really well.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things. Like I know a couple of people. Teresa Smith, she's a whiskey sommelier, and she told me one day, she lives in somewhere, Calgary, anyway, and she told me Canadian whiskey is amazing in Canada. They keep it all up there for themselves because they're greedy. They're way too nice, but because they think, and I don't know why, they think that the American palate and the foreign market palate isn't going to like it. But it's like, if you were to just, I've tried some amazing Canadian whiskeys. I have a Glen Britain right there behind my head. And it was the Battle of the Glens, like when they had that big fight over using the word Glen and stuff like that. It was an amazing whiskey. Now it is a little more like we were talking about earlier, 43%, super light, super creamy, just a great distillate, but at the same time, like 14, 15 years old. And that's the other thing with Canadian, they leave it in the barrel forever, like literally forever. Seriously. Like you're getting 21, 25, 30-year-old barrels and you're getting them. And so it's like they're willing to give away 20-year-old barrels to you, which is a pretty big deal. So having them see you and see what you're doing and see that you're honoring the Canadian whiskey, you're not trying to alter it and add it in a blend to where it's like it's totally masked and you're not gonna even notice it because you dumped a bunch of Elijah Craig on top of it or something like that. It tastes like Canadian whiskey, but it tastes more. I'm going to say it like this: it's more of a bourbon profile of a Canadian whiskey, which to me is really nice. Yes, I do love the Canadian profile, the light, if I want to sit down and not have to think about it. But this one, you could sit down and critique it for an hour, go through it and find all kinds of stuff. And this is just the first sample. So, I mean, come on, guys. If y'all, and I will have, obviously, with all these podcasts, I'm going to have all you guys' information down below. So please go to the website because you guys do special releases online and stuff like that. Is that correct?
We actually, we've been having trouble making enough whiskey these days, which is a good
That's
and
a
bad
good,
problem to
that's a
have.
good problem.
So
Yeah.
the easiest way, which still isn't easy to get our whiskey, is definitely to be on our mailing list.
Right.
The last batch 9 sold out in 90 seconds, which was yeah,
What? What?
which is a bit of a problem. So
That,
we may be moving to a lottery system permanently, but we've been trying to make more and more of it available and expand our
so
distribution.
so let me stop you right there. Okay, so batch 9, it sold out in 90 seconds. How many bottles did you have? I mean, you don't have to get
Over
exact.
6,000 bottles.
Okay, so let's just say, was it limit 1?
It was limit 1.
Limit 1. So, how does that not break the internet, for one? Because like 6,000 people on your website is probably overload for the server. I mean, I'm not IT like you're talking, but I mean, I'm sure that puts a little strain on the server.
A little bit.
In 90 seconds, like how can the computer process? I know it's a lot smarter than we are, obviously, but that blows my mind that it did that in 90 seconds. Like I've heard of stuff selling out, but good Lord. So I guess you guys have a little bit of a following. Is that correct?
We do. Yeah.
Good.
It was interesting. We get a lot of commentary that we read where people say, "Oh, I miss the days when I could just walk into a store and buy Found North." It's like, yeah, we actually. It's funny because we actually do get asked this all the time, which is kind of there's an unfortunate aspect of the industry where there are a lot of people who are there are a lot of brands that will intentionally constrict the supply,
Right.
and the idea is basically if you can't get it, you'll want it more, and it's a
And you'll
way
pay
of
more for it.
yes, and it's a way of sort of creating I might say artificially creating demand.
Manufacturer
We
scarcity.
we are not trying to do that. I can't begin to tell you how much we are not trying to do that. And I think
Right.
for us, I've always seen Found North as this kind of this shared experience with consumer. So there's this funny thing. I think there's this really funny perception in the whiskey industry, which is that like whiskey producers produce whiskey, whiskey, writers like the big names or the magazines review whiskey, and then people discover
Right.
the whiskey, and that it's this sort
Right.
of downstream process, like producer, media, consumer. And I don't think it's that way at all. Actually, I think
Okay.
producers basically produce whiskey and then they pay really close attention to see what people like, and then they try to make more whiskey like that.
Okay.
And
That's a
usually,
good.
the sort of big name magazines and things like that tend to be a little bit later to the party. They're usually
Okay.
picking the winners after they've already been picked as winners.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I get why they do that, because the worst thing you can do is blow your reputation by saying this whiskey's great and then everybody hates it.
Right.
So usually there's a little security around, like, hey, people like this, so now I'm going to say that I found it. And so
Right.
there's this really cool thing within the whiskey industry, which is it's a very, very, very consumer driven production process.
Right.
And it should be. You should be listening extremely carefully to what customers think of your product. So, for example, when we started, we were really interested in making rye because there was already good rye coming out of Canada. There were American brands that were buying Canadian rye and labeling it as American rye and selling it very effectively. And we said, well,
Mhm.
the consumer knows that it's Canadian, even if the brand is calling it American straight rye.
Mhm.
So why don't we just be upfront about the fact that we're making rye? So our first batch was a rye. It was 66% rye, 30% corn, 4% malted barley. Our second batch, which we came out with at virtually the same time, we were going to make it a rye, But as we were blending it, it was just better the more we increased the ratio of corn to rye until we were at about 80% corn, 20% rye. And we didn't think we weren't sure that people would buy it because it's not a bourbon. And it's not really a categorizable whiskey. It's a Canadian whiskey being blended. It's a cask strength Canadian whiskey being blended in America. We weren't even sure what we call it. We just called it cask strength whiskey. And when we made it, we were like, everyone's going to buy a 16-year age stated rye, even if it says from Canada. But are they going to buy this black sheep thing that we created? And people went bananas for batch 2. And we were like, damn. So when we made batch 3, we made it rye, but when we made batch 4, we kind of made another version of batch 2, sort of an iteration off of batch 2. And people went nuts for batch 4. And we were like, shit, I guess this is what we make.
We're on to something.
And so for me, just a long looping path back to the point I was making.
It's all good.
So for me, I love the shared experience of like, I can't tell you how much I love it when people email me pictures and they have batch 1 through 9, you know?
Oh wow.
And they're like, yeah, they've been on the journey with us this whole time, and they know. And if you go to our website, we have a section on each whiskey that says why we made the whiskey. And so I really see this whole experience of becoming a whiskey maker and creating this brand as very much a shared experience with the consumer. And so the idea that we would make a batch and not make enough for the guy who has batches 1 through 9 to get a bottle of 10, I actually find that really heartbreaking.
Yes, absolutely.
It's great when people send me pictures of 1 through 9. It breaks my heart when they show me pictures of 1 through 8 and say, I didn't get 9. Is there anywhere that I'm like, it's gone. You know,
it's gone. There's nothing left.
I can't get you any 9 because there isn't any 9. And so, you know, I think for us, the fast sellout thing is really exciting because it's validation for the brand. It means that people want the whiskey, and you know that's a much better problem than, hey, it's sitting on shelves. That's for damn sure. But no, we are not doing it artificially, and actually we're working our tails off to increase our batch size while still making good whiskey, which is easier said than done. Increasing the batch size, you add more variables, and there's just it's a much more arduous process, which I could happily get into, but for now, just take my word for it. Making bigger batches good is really hard, and we want the whiskeys to get better, not just sort of hold up to par. So it's been a fun challenge.
Yeah, because I in that same turn, like, you know, like this one has 21-year-old corn. Well, let's say you increase the batch, and let's say your supplier only has 3 barrels of 21-year-old corn. You're screwed. You don't have any more 21-year-old corn, you know? So it's like, what do you do? Now you have to change the entire batch. It has to be something completely different, you know? So like, I get it. Or you have to say like, okay, the next batch, we got to have this many barrels ready to go before we even get started. And then you know as well as I do, as soon as you do it, you're like, well, crap, we undershot that again. So we're still going to be, you know, so it's like, and then you have to think about, which I know this is bottom line stuff, but like you have to think about, okay, let's say we make enough for 10,000 bottles, whatever. Well, you know, put a number out there. It doesn't matter. Let's say we make enough, and let's say that one, somebody in the ether, which, you know, God forbid that doesn't happen, knock on wood, says, oh, it's not great. Then what? Then what? Then you're sitting on 9,999 bottles of crap. You know, like what do you have? I guess that goes into my question. What are some of the issues that you have to deal with the blending? Like you said earlier, you blended over 100 different samples and stuff like that. What did you ever have something that just fell apart and you just could not recover it?
Yeah, the blending experience for us is cool because um, part of one of the things we say as just a sort of internally as a team is follow the whiskey,
Hmm.
and it's a um, it has some double meaning for us in terms of uh, you know how we ended up making Canadian whiskey was much
Right.
more about the whiskey than anything else. But but it's also about blending. Blending often is compared to painting a picture. People say, okay, well, the different components are the paints, and then you just paint your picture. Um, it's a rudimentary analogy that makes sense at a basic level. Um, but the reality is that when you take the color red paint and you blend it with the color blue paint, you get purple, and you'll get
Mm.
purple every time. When you
Right.
mix whiskeys together, they don't behave like
No. No.
that.
Yeah.
Not at all. And so what I like to say is blending is actually a lot more like making music.
Hmm.
And my my best friend is a pretty serious musician, and I've sat around in the basement with him while he's got his guitar and he's writing a song, and there's so much just riffing. He's just sort
Hmm.
of playing, and he's playing and playing and playing, and then all of a sudden you see this moment of inspiration where he gets a few notes together in just the right combination, and he latches on to that, and
Right.
and it's like, okay, now I can start building an entire
Hmm.
song around this.
Over that. Yeah. Exactly.
That's exactly what blending is like. You
Hmm.
go in and you're not like, oh, I'm just gonna take a sprinkle of this and a sprinkle of that and a sprinkle of this
Right.
and make some fucking cake. It doesn't
No,
work like that
that's
at
not.
all.
That's not how it works.
And so a lot of times we have a concept in our head. Usually when we're working with different components, we'll have a vision, or we'll have a component that is presenting a certain flavor, or it's usually a certain combination of flavor and texture that we really love, and we'll usually shape the entire whiskey around that. But as you can imagine, as we're tweaking and we're messing with different components, and sort of, there's a lot of intuition. There's a lot of
Yeah.
like, well, okay, we have this component over here that's got this lovely floral component. Like, what would that do to this spice here? And it does something that you really don't expect. That's absolutely
Right.
wonderful. You don't sit there and go, throw that idea out. You follow the
Yeah.
whiskey. We
Right.
start going, wait a second, whoa, this is doing something really cool. So let's go down that path. And a lot of what we're doing when we're blending is troubleshooting. It's problem
Hmm.
solving. We think of the whiskey. This is another reason why I like the music analogy. Um, I really don't. I really appreciate tasting notes. I write our
Hmm.
tasting notes. If you go on our website and you read the ridiculous copy that is the tasting notes for our whiskey, that's this idiot just getting drunk and having fun.
Hey.
And trying to write something that's enticing and
Hmm.
gives you a feel for the whiskey. That being said, a list of flavors does not encapsulate the experience
No.
of consuming a whiskey. In the
No.
same way that a list of notes doesn't tell you the even the beginnings of what a song actually sounds like and how it impacts you. And so when we think about the whiskey, we actually think about it in four quadrants. So
Okay.
most people do nose, palate, finish, right? That's like
Right.
how people use nose, palate, finish, nose, palate, finish. We don't blend for nose. That's just, and if you want to know more about that, I'll tell you
Yeah.
more about
Yeah.
that. But we focus much more on the palate, and we break the palate into four quadrants. So the
Okay.
landing is the first quadrant, the finish is the fourth quadrant, and the mid palate we really believe has kind of two sections, and
Okay.
really, like, there's the landing into the mid palate, and there's the mid
Hmm.
palate into the finish, right?
Okay. I get it.
So you get it, and so when we think about a whiskey, a lot of times we'll have a component, or we'll have some combination of components that does something, say it does something really beautiful in the second and third quadrants, but
Right.
the landing sucks, right? And it's like, okay, so we need the whiskey to land with a bang. It needs to have a
Right.
good introduction. It needs to pull you into the story that is that particular blend. So how do you retain that midsection? How do you retain that second and third quadrant the way you like it,
Right.
while adding something to the beginning that is invariably going to change all the other pieces of the puzzle? So a
Yes,
lot of times
absolutely.
you're like, it's like, as soon as I tweak this lever up, all of these other things go down. So then I got to figure out and so when you're blending, you're riffing until you sort of have the idea, and then you're trying to construct around it to
Right.
give it a full shape and make it into a full story. And to answer your original question, man, I'm on a roundabout night tonight. But to answer
It's all good. I love it.
your original question, there have been many times where we can't turn a riff into a full song. It's just every time you fix the beginning, you fuck the finish, and
Right.
every time you add the spice component that you need, you add an astringency that you can't deal with, and you just can't. No matter how much tweaking we do, we have a lot of dead end blends in our blending book where it was like, hey, this worked. And frankly, there are times where we have very successfully gotten a new component or aged a component into a profile
Right.
that opened up an old blend to us, where we went, well, wait a second, now that
Yeah.
we have this piece that
Yeah.
we didn't have in the past, let's go back, pull that formula out, and rejigger it and see what happens.
Right.
And so we do that from time to time, and that's super fun. And all of our in our blending books, when you start working on a formula, when you're talking about it to each other, you don't want to sit there and be like, you have to name the formula. Otherwise,
Right.
you're just the whole time you're being like, okay, yeah, the whiskey that is, 30% this, 24% this, right?
Right.
You don't want to say that every time. So we'll give it some goofy internal name,
Right.
and each iteration is like, it's we had what are some of the good what are some of the good ones? What were some of my absolute favorite names that we did? Viceroy. We had Viceroy Prime, Viceroy 1, Viceroy 2. And by Viceroy like 17, we were like, this is never going to turn into a good
This is not a good one.
Yeah. So we have these lists of hilariously named formulas that never worked out.
And so when you're doing these sample pulls, you're just pulling small samples, right? You're not blending entire barrels. You're just doing 100 mil, 300 mil, maybe a bottle, depending.
That's
And you're taking small samples. You're not sitting back there chugging bottles, are you?
Chugging bottles, yeah. No, it's that was one of the hardest things was understanding how palate fatigue really works.
Oh God, it is.
So I mentioned we don't blend for nose. That doesn't mean the nose doesn't matter for us, but it's just I don't know about you, but the nose is like the cover of the book, like, yeah, it can entice me and I'm really intrigued, but I want to open that sucker up and start reading. And that for me doesn't happen until the whiskey hits my lips. And so, it baffles me to this day. No one on our team ever worked in production before Found North. So we've sort of self-taught all of our own processes. And that doesn't mean we aren't familiar with how other people do it. And so many other people, so many other brands, they're blending exclusively by nose at 20%. And to me, it's insane that they can make good whiskey. And I'm not saying they don't. I'm blown away that they do.
Absolutely.
It just, there are so many times where I know something and it just doesn't represent what the palate is actually going to be.
Absolutely.
And so for us, when we're tasting, I find that I can sample in a sitting. I can sample 6 to at absolute maximum 8 whiskeys.
Okay.
before I can't fine tune the whiskey anymore. So what I mean by that is like, look, if you gave me an Irish whiskey and then you gave me a peated Scotch on whiskey 15 and 16, I could tell you which one was the peated Scotch. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
But if I were tweaking a formula where I'm moving one ingredient up by 2 percentage points and removing those 2 percentage points from some other component in the blend,
Right.
where those whiskeys are going to be 98% the same,
Right.
I can't do that level of fine tuning past the 6th or really 7th blend. So after you get past 8, really all I can do is directionality. I can say, yeah, this is getting a little bit spicier, but like, yeah, that's kind of it. So for us, I can personally do about 6 to 8 test blends per sitting, and I can do 3 per day when we're really cranking.
Okay.
And we're using micropipettes, and we're using 5 milliliter samples or 10 milliliter samples. If it's a 10 milliliter sample, I'm usually not finishing all of it. You're still drinking 30 to 40 liters, milliliters, not liters. Good God, milliliters of cask strength whiskey per sitting, which is, a drink and change. So it's still taxing on the body for sure.
Right.
But yeah, so the fascinating thing about that is when we started and we had no experience with the blends, we blended way too much in a given day, 27 test blends in a day or something like that. And we'd go back the next day and you'd be sitting there going, why the hell did I think this was good? And it's like, well, because you couldn't taste it. And that's the reality of it.
Palate was blown out.
Palate was completely blown out. The second thing was we really didn't have good language for communicating both to ourselves and to each other the structure of the whiskey. And so we were very used to writing about whiskey, talking about whiskey in a way that was good for selling whiskey, but actually not very good for making whiskey. One of the funniest experiences I ever had was the first time I ever met Brent Elliott. I was in his lab at Four Roses, and he was pouring me some of my favorite small batch limited edition, just like the best of the best of Four Roses. And we're going through things and I'm like, all right, Brent, what do you taste on this one? And he's like, well, it's got good caramel, good vanilla, some baking spice, and some red fruit. And I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah, that's the 2013. What do you got on this 2014? And he's like, well, it's got some vanilla, some caramel, some good baking spices, and maybe a little bit more red fruit. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like,
what are we doing?
You're the maker of some of my favorite whiskey in the world,
right?
And you're talking to me about it like
all these whiskeys are the same.
First whiskey in a week, it's like,
right.
And yet talking to him about how they make the blend, I think he's one of the most brilliant whiskey makers in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
And it was a strong lesson for us because we would do these blends, test blends, and we would write these floral bullshit notes. And then the next day you sit there and you're looking at what you wrote about it and you have no sense of directionality. Okay, well, what do I do with it? How do I make it better? Yeah, okay, I wrote that it's got marzipan and, cherry cola on a Sunday night, whatever the hell I wrote, but I don't know how to make that any better. And so it took us a long time. Now when I'm writing notes, my tasting notes look like Brent Elliott's. I'm sitting here and I'm going, this one's got good baking spice, good sweetness. It's probably lacking a little bit here, and it needs a little more fat in the second quadrant. But that's actually super useful because then when I'm tasting through the components and I'm going, hey, this one's got a lot of fat in the second quadrant. I wonder if I add that to the blend, if I'll fix my problem. And then lo and behold, you do it and it works. And so it took us a long time not to just learn how to blend the components and how they fit together, but
Right.
honestly, like learning how to communicate the blends to each other and into our notes such that it was conducive to revising the blend and progressing was probably the hardest lesson learned.
Right. Right. That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to a couple of blenders recently, and they're the same way. It's like, yeah, you can get super vivid on your tasting notes. Like I do every Sunday night. Every Sunday night, I do a deep dive of a bottle, right? And I go through and I give tasting notes. And it's like you're saying, it's those very like ornate, like cherry cola with a splash of grenadine or some, some bullshit like that. But it's like really, it tastes like bourbon. Like it's bourbon that tastes like bourbon that tastes like bourbon. Like they're all the same. No, but it's very, I do that like because I was trained to do that, but at the same time, like I really want the consumer to go out and buy a bottle. I'm not making any money on it, but I want them to go out and buy a bottle. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, I'm picking up all that maybe if I sit there long enough, but it's not really helping me if I wanted to blend it or something like that. Speaking of that, do you want to get into batch 10?
Yeah, let's get into 10, and then when we do the third whiskey, I just pulled up on my phone the flavor notes that I wrote for it.
Okay.
And we'll get a laugh at we'll get a good laugh at me for writing these notes, and I think it'll drive home the point that you and I are both getting at.
It's all good. So batch 10 is 66 corn, 29 wheat, 5 barley, 23-year-old corn, 19-year-old corn, 9-year-old barley, 8-year-old wheat, and it's coming in at 61.9 for those who are following along.
So we were really
I only
excited.
wrote.
Go ahead.
Oh, I only wrote batch 10 8 year 61.9 because I didn't have that much typing room.
No, that's totally fine. No, so we haven't revealed yet that we're doing this, so you'll be one of the first people to sort of know what batch 10 is, which is kind of exciting. But to answer all of those emails that we got about batch 5, when are you going to make another batch 5? It was funny. You basically said something earlier that was right on the money. When we did batch 5, we only had 3 barrels of the wheat, so there was no way to remake it. And so they're like, people were begging us to make it, and we said we don't have the whiskey. And on top of that, we didn't want to make just the same thing. The point wasn't, hey, let's make the same whiskey. We want to make a better version of this, and we didn't have the components. So for the last 2 years and change, we have been sourcing, recasking, and tweaking this particular blend. So the story of having a blend formula in our bag that just didn't work. Mm-hmm. The wheat was one of those formulas where we kept going to it, trying to recreate it, and just not having the right pieces.
Right.
And we really recently acquired the right piece, which was actually the 9-year-old barley. Barley's really fun, and we don't use it very often because we haven't found very good old sources of Canadian barley. They don't exist. There aren't a lot of them. This one happens to be a 9-year that was aged in New American oak. That was spectacular. And what it brought was this meaty, fat, heavy texture. I think. What did you say the percentage was? Is it 4 or 5? I can't actually even remember if it was 4 or 5%.
And I will tell you on this sample bottle, it is so small. I have to get my
sorry,
5% barley. I got to get my readers out just to look at it.
Just to look at it. But it was 5%, which doesn't sound like a lot, 5%. But it added. So we had a 6-year-old wheat, actually like a almost 7-year-old wheat that we recast into New American oak for 2 years. That is one of the 8-year-old wheats that's in this whiskey. But it was the 9-year-old barley that took what was a rich, fun batch 5 and added a whole new layer of complexity to it, which frankly is why I sent this to you,
Okay.
is so that you could see batch 5 and batch 10. Batch 5 hasn't been for sale. We sent you we sent you a sample of batch 5 from my own personal collection.
Oh wow, I appreciate that. I feel very special, guys.
Yeah, so you could do a side by side.
And guess what? Nobody's getting the rest of this. I promise you. That is going to come home with me. Daddy's going to enjoy that one for sure. But I will tell you that like going from 5 to 10 was a good choice because obviously it's been a second since I had the 5, but I can tell they're very similar in their taste. But this one just has, like you're saying, I'm going to use your wording on this, on the third quadrant. It has something there that I'm not going to say was lacking in the other one, because it wasn't lacking of anything. It just gave a little bit more. It gave a little, I want to call it oomph or something like that in there. And I love a good single malt. Like I am an American single malt and Scotch and Irish fan. And I love that malty note, and I think it gives just the slightest, obviously that's me prying in on it, but it gives the slightest bit of maltiness, even though it's only 5%. But like I'm picking it out, and I feel like it gives it, like you're saying, that little backbone that it might not have had before.
The word I would use is grip. It really, like in that third quadrant, which I completely agree with you, that's right where it is. The batch 5 was lands super creamy, super buttery creamy, just kind of like a good bourbon wood.
Right.
And then into the fourth quadrant it starts to move into those real baking spices. What this one does is it lands creamy in the same way that sort of that butterscotch vanilla, whatever, that note that we like, that's new wood wheat.
Right.
But before it dips into that like lovely kind of heavier baking spice quality on the finish, there's this grippy maltiness that pieces those that just bridges the gap and really gives it more of a progression that I think completely elevates the quality of this whiskey. I love me some 5. 10 is one of my favorite whiskeys we've made.
Absolutely, and I feel like we're speaking the same words. And it's super cool for you and for me as well now, to sit back and be like, okay, we did really well on 5. Let's make 10 the same but better or different. Maybe not better. We don't need to make it better because it's a standalone product for what it is.
Make it better.
And the people who have it, if they haven't drank through it already, they're not going to open it for a while, so they're not going to know either way. So it's because as you well know, there's people in the whiskey community that, and this is no dig to anybody, that keep the bottles and don't drink them. They just collect them. They want to collect them, and they do drink bottles, but they don't drink them as much as they should. And then there's the people who buy the bottle, as soon as they buy it, they open it and they want to try it.
That's me.
And that's I'm guilty. And for a while I wasn't. Because I was like, I've got enough bottles, right? I don't need another bottle. That can just sit on the shelf. It's fine. But then once your wife starts getting mad at you, that's another thing. And she's like, this floor whiskey is getting into the living room. Like you gotta start drinking some of the whiskey, right?
Yes, I know that.
She doesn't listen, so she knows, but she sees it every day. She's like, "Babe, you really got to do something about that." I'm like, "I'm trying. I don't know what to do. I can only drink so much at one time." So yeah. I mean, I totally get where you're coming from. Like you want to make it the same but different because each batch needs to be its own thing. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, making it the best of what it is, and it's a little proofier, which is to me is fine. And the fact that you're presenting these at their, I mean, I would say natural cask strength or whatever, and you guys are doing all of the extra barreling, and you're putting them in, marrying vats and stuff like that, to where you're not just taking a sourced whiskey putting it in a bottle and slapping a label on it, like so many people do with MGP. And I love MGP. Don't get me
Me
wrong;
too.
they
Same.
make
I
great
love
bourbon.
MGP.
They make great bourbon.
I know.
Make great 95.5 ryes. They are
Yes, I do.
dominating the market. But at the same time, for the producers and the people that are taking their whiskey and slapping a label on it and not doing anything else to it, and I don't care about finishing and all that stuff. Do what you want to the whiskey. Make it yours. Make it your whiskey. And I feel like you guys are really embracing that. And the fact that you guys are blending the way that you're blending and the amounts that you guys are blending, obviously it shows because you sell out in 90 seconds. I heard about the next one we're going to drink when it came out, and I was on the mailing list and it said, hey, get in there. I couldn't even get in there either. So we'll talk about that one in a minute. I don't want to take away from batch 10. But my buddy Josh Edwards, your drinking buddy, I think he talked to you. We had been talking back and forth about you guys for a while, and he goes, man, you really need to have them on your show. And so he was kind of one of the reasons, other than I wanted to get you guys here anyway, because I've heard many a great thing about what you guys are doing. So okay, this is a good one. I feel, and it might not have been on my list that I sent you, but it's fine. What trends do you see in the whiskey industry, and how are you guys adapting to those influencing trends?
I think there are some that we're really interested in, and some that we're actually actively trying to go in the other direction.
Right.
I think what's really fun for me about Canadian whiskey is no one knows the rules, which cuts both ways. It's something that can be a tough thing. I'll see people writing about Canadian whiskey, and they'll say Canadian blends can have 80% NGS in them, which is absolutely not true. American blended whiskey can, but Canadian cannot. Everything has to be aged. But there are with us, because we're really transparent about what the process is and how we're making the whiskey. People don't seem to mind that they don't exactly know what the rules and regulations are about Canadian, because they just see what we're doing and they believe that we're doing best practices, and we believe we're doing best practices. But the other side of that coin that's wonderful for us is, you just alluded to it a moment ago. I think for bourbon, for non-distilling producers, there is starting to be this feeling of like, if you're just buying from MGP and you're not doing anything to the whiskey, why am I paying for this one versus the other 7 MGPs that I have that are on my shelf? And the reality is, as non-distilling producers, those bourbon producers can only do one of two things in my mind to really affect the whiskey. One is blend it. And that doesn't mean make it into a blend. I just mean you can be blending a straight bourbon with another straight bourbon and still call it a straight bourbon. But blend it, which has always been a bit of a dicey term in American whiskey. If you say, "Oh, we're blending this," people are like, "Whoa, what?"
It's a blended whiskey.
It's a blended whiskey. It's
amazing.
Whiskey.
All whiskey, if it's not a single barrel, is blended whiskey. Sorry, guys.
Right? It's one of the funniest things, which is like the number of words that the bourbon industry has come up with to not say the word blend, batch, vat, marriage, right? Mingle, right? We mingled this. It's like, come on, guys, you fucking blended them. I don't know,
it. That's all
you don't have to call it a blend, but that's what you did. And if you're any good, you spent a holy hell of a lot of time making sure you got that blend exactly right. That's why your whiskey's good. But so the only things that non-distilling producers can really do to their bourbon is they either have to blend it or they have to finish it. And finishing is also something that bourbon enthusiasts really push back on when it comes to bourbon. I think what we're seeing now is I think we're seeing a little bit more flexibility from the whiskey consumer about this for bourbons. But with Canadian whiskey, because nobody has these preconceived notions of what its heritage is and therefore what it should be,
Hmm.
we can do whatever the fuck we want.
Yes,
And as long as
absolutely.
we're open about what we're doing and honest about the process and tell you what it is, people are pretty excited to try whatever experiment we're running.
Right.
And so I think the most obvious one is finishing. Um,
Hmm.
but we took a lot of inspiration from the Scotch industry when it comes to finishing, as opposed to
Yes.
the American whiskey industry, because the American whiskey industry doesn't do very much of it outside of
No.
single malt. Um, Although there are some incredibly good finished ryes. Rye, I almost think rye should be finished, but that's
Yes.
a whole nother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
I'm with you.
the spice, if you put rye into a port barrel, you're basically cheating, because you are taking that lovely rye spice and combining it with like a rich,
Yep.
fatty red fruit sweetness.
Hmm.
It's fucking
Come on.
incredible. I don't know.
Yeah.
Come on, like you.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I digress. My
Yeah.
point is that what the Scots have always been really, really good at is matching their distillate to their aging regimen. And what
Yes.
I mean by that is, like, there's a reason with single malt in particular, you can there are a lot of different pieces of the distillation process that will dictate to the style of the spirit. And so the size and shape of the still and the cut points, the
Right.
rate at which you're distilling, these things will dramatically affect the compounds that are in the raw spirit.
Right.
And so if your intention, for example, like a Glendronach, is to use a big fatty Oloroso sherry cask that's going
Yes,
to
please.
have a ton of meat, probably a little bit of sulfur,
Hmm.
and it's going to have a bunch of really heavy, sort of rich fruit notes to it.
Right.
You need a bulldog of a spirit to handle
Yes.
that. If you get this
Absolutely.
meek spirited, weak ass, like tall, still,
Yeah.
gentle spirit, and you put it into a first fill sherry cask, it's going to taste like sherry, and I don't mean
It's
that in a good way.
yeah, not in a good way.
It's
It's gonna
going to
take
get
like the
wiped
bad
out.
parts. Yeah.
And so the really good Scotch distilleries, whether it's Glenmorangie making a really bright, light spirit and putting it into ex bourbon, knowing that they're going to emphasize um, all of the sort of brighter fruit notes, or Nectar Or, for example, they're
Oh,
just geniuses to do that, to
love
put
that.
that really lovely spirit that they've developed for 10 years and
Hmm.
transfer it into sauternes and just pick up all of that like desserty quality. They
So
have the
good.
right spirit to do that. You
Right.
wouldn't do that with Glendronach. It wouldn't
No.
work.
No.
And so what the Scots have always done really effectively is know thy spirit. They know what they're working with, and they
Yes.
match it really, really effectively to the barrel.
Absolutely.
And so for us, when we looked at finishing, we weren't interested. We've never done Amburana. We have no interest in doing Amburana. Amburana is something
Thank you.
that is um, a fun experiment that I'm
Right.
glad people did. It's not for me.
No.
And I don't tend to like Amburana whiskeys.
Right.
They don't ring my bell. If they ring yours,
Right.
you know,
More power to you.
more power to you. I'm not telling you what taste should be or what your palate should be.
Right.
It's just not ours, and we find it slightly gimmicky, because it
Yes.
doesn't really make sense. And frankly, they call it Brazilian oak. It is not a Kirkis species. It is not an oak species. It is not oak, and
It's not.
oak is God when it comes to
Right.
whiskey.
Absolutely.
So for us, when we think about doing our further maturations, we're super cognizant of the spirit and the quality of the wood, much more than trying to find really trendy wood species.
Mhm.
It's not about like, hey, we want to call this whatever, or we want to say this is Mizunora for the sake of being Mizunora,
Mhm.
because it's hot right now. I would do a Mizunora cask if it made sense with the spirit we were working with.
Absolutely.
And so, I think for us, when we think about the finishing trends, we're really excited about it because we have a lot of freedom, we have a lot of flexibility, but we're less about trying to have a barrel type that has good name value is not really, that's something we're kind of pushing against.
Right.
And when we get into Helldiver, we'll really talk about this even more, because
Yes.
I think Helldiver is the prime example of how we sort of matched our spirit to our finishing regimen.
Well, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. And so what I'm going to do, I've already poured the Helldiver, and because
Good,
I wanted to let it sit, because as a good whiskey person should, you should let your whiskey sit for a minute before you start drinking it, as he's literally pouring it to drink it right now. But whatever.
That's all right.
No,
we're gonna talk for a minute first.
I'm picking on you, but okay. So the Helldiver, to me, I've heard of you guys for a long time, but I haven't got on the bandwagon for a minute. It's just one of those things. You know how it goes. Like you follow so many different brands, and then you're like, oh shit, they're doing what is this? Okay, I got to get in on that. And then of course, nobody, three people got the whiskey. The one person that I know, got the whiskey. Anyway, long story. But so to me, this one is kind of what you're saying, and it's the next question that I wanted to ask you is, where do you see Found North in the future? Where do you see the company going? Are you, and I don't want you to, I feel like you don't need to. Have you thought about branching out and doing, like, maybe getting some scotches and doing that as well, or something else? Make sure answer accordingly, of course.
No. Yeah, no. I tend to be an open book until we have something that we're actually working on, and I need to, like, not let the cat out of the bag. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm like, oh, I think we could do this, we could do that, or whatever it is. And then once we do one of those things, and we're getting really close to, the release of something, and I'm sitting here, I'm chomping at the bit to talk about it, and I'm like, I can't talk about it yet, because
no, you can't.
Then I'm gonna
talk about it.
All right. But no, I think we get asked a lot. We rarely get asked if we would do a Scotch, though. That I'd be more interested in doing a Scotch than an American whiskey, to be totally honest with you.
A stinky old peated Scotch.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
You guys would do that amazing. I feel.
Man, we'd have fun with that. We would have fun with that.
You and me will do a single barrel of it, and we'll just one barrel. They'll give us 250 bottles. That'll be enough for us to just go away, and it'll be fine. We'll be fine.
I did a single barrel for the company in Boston that I used to work with. It was an Ardbeg cask, and it had standing Ardbeg liquid in it when we filled it for them, and it was spectacular. Actually,
I'm sure
it was so good. It was so good, and it was a rye.
Ardbeg is one of my favorites.
Beautiful. But no, we get asked a lot if we would do a different category, or even blend with a whiskey that wasn't Canadian.
Right.
And the answer is I won't say never, but the answer right now is no. And the reason isn't because I don't have any interest in it. It's actually because there's so much room to grow into what we're doing with Canadian. And
I totally understand.
And I think for us, whether the Canadians will have us or not, we feel like we're flag bearers for at least what we want to do with Canadian whiskey.
Right.
And we would hate to sort of dilute some of our messaging by just imagine if we blended in a Scotch and people absolutely loved it. It's like, well, that's great, but then it's like, oh shit, well, why aren't you guys doing that every time? And then it becomes like, well, what are we? Are we a Canadian whiskey brand, or are we just sort of blenders of whiskey? And so there's a little bit for us of we've gone down a pretty big trunk of this whiskey tree that is Canadian whiskey, and we just don't want to get we don't want to cross our branches and get tangled into other categories.
I totally agree.
So that's probably not on the horizon. But for us, what's been really cool is we had no funding when we started. We self-funded our whole brand.
Amen. Amen.
Um,
I congratulate you for that.
we worked
I
as
mean,
a
and
whiskey
I'm
consulting
scared, but
firm for like 3 years before we had
yeah,
enough money to even buy a small amount of whiskey to launch Found North. Um, and good God, did we bet the farm? That was the scariest year of my life.
sure.
But no, I think so. For us, when we first started, we were buying. We were only buying exactly what we needed to make the blends because that's
Yeah,
all we could afford.
I can, yeah,
We couldn't buy things and then recast them and sit on the money that is
sit on
the
stock.
liquid.
Yeah,
Right. Um, but as we've gotten bigger, we've just constantly reinvested in our stocks of whiskey. We spend no money on marketing, like literally none.
dude,
I'm
that's
not
so
kidding.
amazing.
We've
That
never I think we did one targeted Instagram ad once early on for like $50 just as a like
shut up.
let's see what this does. We have never spent a dime on marketing.
I love that.
And legitimately we are a really, really product driven company. And our belief was like the liquid will speak for itself. But our other belief was most of the ways in which people discover our whiskey is someone pours it for them
Hmm.
and waits for the person to drink it, waits until their reaction, and then goes, aha, fucker, it's Canadian, right? Like that's how most people discover Found North, or at least how people used to discover Found North early on with our brand. And so what that meant for us is like we can't really afford to miss that
Right.
story you're telling of like, well, what if we made 10,000 bottles and people didn't like it?
Yeah.
That's our worst nightmare, not just because we'd be sitting on those bottles, but because it would confirm people's pre-existing notion of what Canadian is, which is that it's not premium, and that it's
Right.
not good. And so for us, like a bourbon company can make a dud every once in a while, and
Right.
people will go back to the well. They're not sitting there
Right.
like,
That's fine.
oh, you know what, bourbon sucks. They're like, well, this one wasn't for me, but I'm going
Yeah.
back for sure.
Yeah.
Canadian doesn't. We don't have that liberty.
No,
And so
absolutely not.
for us, we have to be really, really, really liquid driven. And so the fun aspect of that is we invest all of our money and all of our time in just trying to fine tune the process and own more and more of the process. So first it started with simple things like buying liquid and recasting the whiskey. But over time, we've learned to dictate to so many more aspects. We've learned to experiment with the fill strength. We travel to Jesus when we have barrels imported from Europe into barrel brokers, which are all located in Kentucky. We fly
Right.
down to Louisville and we smell each barrel and we inspect each barrel before we ship it to our warehouse to fill it. Every single
Wow.
one. People think we're fucking insane.
Yeah, well, I mean, but rightfully
kind of are.
so.
Rightfully so. So for us, the cool thing has been adding layers and layers and layers and layers onto the production process, where now we're looking at cavitation rates when we bottle our whiskey, so that they don't get too many bubbles in the liquid right as it's going into the bottle and affect the flavor by 1%.
Right.
We're neurotic kind of about every piece of this, and so I think as we move forward, we're pretty constantly like a lot of times we use our single barrels as a way of experimenting to see what we might do in the future. So if you look at Found North single barrels, they often precede something that we're going to do later on.
Right.
And so the best example that'll lead us right into Helldiver. So I might as well just take us right into Helldiver. So we love the idea of doing single barrels, but you can't do a Canadian single barrel the way you can do a bourbon single barrel, because the whiskey's not done. If I grabbed 100% corn and I turned it into a single barrel, it's going to be a boring ass whiskey. It's not. It doesn't have any character
Yeah.
to it. It's not
Yeah.
like bourbon where they've already mixed the grains together, and so
Right.
it's developed into something that can potentially be a final product. A single barrel of
Right.
Canadian whiskey can't be a final product. So we looked at it and we said, well, how the hell do we do single barrels? And our solution was, and this is where we took so much inspiration from Scotch. Our solution was, well, what if we created a blend that had a lot of room to grow into its wood profile? So you create a blend that has a foundation, but really has some space to
Right.
get more tannin, get more of the wood spices, mature, and get some of the extractive benefits of a new cask. And what we realized was we could shape the spirit to the cask types we wanted to use.
Yes.
So with the Scots, they're doing it at the distillation process, at the distillation level, but we realized we could do it at the blend level. We could create a blend. And so our first sort of set of single barrels was actually, believe it or not, was a rye. And we created a rye, and then we put it into all of these different casks, and we saw what they did. And most of them worked out. We weren't expecting that. We kind of thought this would be a bit of a break even for us, where we'd lose probably 5 of 20 casks, which just wouldn't be good enough to sell. Only 2 of them ended up being unsellable, and we don't know what the hell to do with those. We still have those 2 barrels just aging and getting worse. I don't know what the hell to do.
I'll take them. Just give them to me. I'll sip on them.
But that inspired us to make Peregrine and Helldiver, which we call our high altitude collection. And so with Helldiver, the process for making Helldiver was we created a blend. It was a blend of 15-year-old corn, 18 and 19-year-old rye, a 22 and a 23-year-old corn. We blended those together. They had a lot of room to grow into their wood profile. So we recast that entire blend into a combination of Pedro Jimenez sherry casks, New American oak, and actually we used a little bit of cognac, a few cognac barrels. We further matured those for between 6 and 12 months. And then we reblended a portion of those casks back together to create Helldiver. We don't use all of the barrels. We still have to make the blend re-knit together. That was the conception and the construction of Helldiver. And that really came out of the success we had doing the single barrels, where we were like, shit, we could blend some of these back together and it would be spectacular. And that's actually, that is Helldiver right there for you. It's 80. I was just gonna say it's 85% corn, 15% rye, 1% malted barley.
And I will tell you from the other two, which were absolutely amazing, I'm leaning a little bit more towards batch 10, just to let you know. But I think it's that maltiness. But anyway, this Helldiver is so, I'm gonna say it's a little more Scotchy profile because of the sherry and stuff like that.
Totally.
Like it's Canadian. I know it's Canadian. It tastes Canadian. It tastes like bourbon, finished bourbon, maybe. It is so unique. I think that's the thing. It's so unique because it has all of the flavors that you would think would be a Scotch because of the sherry and the cognac and the whatever else. And then it has but it has a lot of corn. So you're like, what? Yeah. That's corny. And then so like it's kind of intriguing because you get the best of both worlds. And I'm a lover of all whiskey. So like for me, this is banging because it's right down the middle of like I want a sticky bourbon, but I want a Scotch at the same time. So like this is like two roads diverging the wood, it's like hey. This is slapping. And I said slapping like I'm a 14-year-old little boy.
No.
And the thing I love the most, and you guys are presenting this at cask strength, and to where if I wanted to put a little water with it or put it on an ice ball, or these are premium whiskeys, guys. So like I wouldn't say put it in a cocktail. but if you were
Not
to put it in a
Helldiver.
cocktail, not Helldiver, but if you were to put it in a cocktail, like, it would stand out so much. I don't recommend it, because these are sipping whiskeys. That's what they
They're
are.
hard
They
to
are
get. If they were easier to get, it's
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
used to
if you
make
were
cocktails with some of our whiskeys.
yeah. If you were mass producing these and making 1 million bottles at a time, I would say yes, mix it in a cocktail. But no, this is one you put in a Glencairn and put in a nice. A lot of people drink whiskey in rocks glasses. I have no shame in that. Although you don't get a lot of the nose like you're talking about, but you guys don't go for nose anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
But I will tell you, like you could sit on the front porch, just hanging out, sipping on some of this whiskey, and it's gonna be amazing. Now here's the issue for me as well as the listeners. The 90-second buyout is a little scary to me, and it is to everybody else. Like, that's the only thing that I'm not going to say turns me away, because it doesn't turn me away. It intrigues me. It makes me want to get online and be like the first one there, the first one to buy. So how do you and you've kind of touched on this anyway, but how do you combat that? Like, you have so many people wanting your product, and this is such an amazing product, guys. Like, if you haven't heard of them, now you have. And these guys are doing amazing things. Follow, like, subscribe, do all the things. I don't care. But also, like, how do you compete with the growing, like I've said before, with the growing market in your brand, just in your brand?
Yeah.
And then like you're saying, you make the bigger blends, well, then they taste different. So, like, do you just do more releases? Is that how you compete with that?
I think we want to do more. We want to do more releases, and we want to do bigger releases. But we're doing it step by step, so that the quality can remain peak. I mean, really peak. And to be honest with you, we've made a lot of whiskey that people have really enjoyed and that has sold out really fast. And I can't begin to tell you how excited I am about that. I think in the next 1 to 3 years, we're going to make our best whiskey. Not like one whiskey that's our best whiskey, but I think we are moving into making our best
coming
whiskey.
Into your own.
And I really believe that, because we have been, we've been successfully making good whiskey while experimenting, while continuing to tweak and learn our palates, learn the cask maturation that works well with what we're doing, and also buying deeper and deeper into the spirit and investing really heavily in our wood source. Right. And one company that we've been working a lot with recently is Kelvin. They're so good. They're so good at making barrels. And they give us a lot of flexibility to be pretty prescriptive about what we want. So we get to mess with char level, we get to mess with toasting level.
I love that.
And so and so when we do something, we'll take 5,000 liters of liquid, and I'll put 1,000 liters into this particular wood treatment of new wood in this part of the warehouse at this fill strength, and then we'll do something different with the next 1,000, the next 1,000, the next 1,000, the next 1,000, and that's how we do it. And most of that whiskey will turn out to at least be good and usable, but some of it will turn out spectacular. And when it turns out spectacular, that's when we double down. That's when we look at it and we say, hey, this worked extremely well with what we were trying to do and with what we're trying to make. Let's make 5 times as much of that and give it an extra year to mature. And so, the Found North, we launched our first whiskey in April of 21. It's been 3 years and we had no money when we started. I just feel like we've been been playing with our hands tied, with one hand tied behind our back a little bit.
Right.
And
Right.
we're just starting to really we're really just starting to we're just starting to do some of the coolest stuff that I think we're doing at this company. And fortunately, but unfortunately, some of the experiments and some of the projects that we did that turned out really well, we've now doubled down this year, the end of this year, and it's going to take 6 months. It's going to take 12 months. It's going to take 18 months for those investments to come into fruition. And all the while, I think we're getting better as blenders and as producers. And so I think to answer your question, yeah, it's hard to continue to make whiskey that people are really excited about, and to not get boring, right? Not continue to do exciting things. And the way we've combated that is by spending the last 3 years investing in ourselves and investing in the liquid, such that now we can really spread our wings a little bit and make what I think is going to be our best whiskey in the next couple of years.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, Chris over there told me I had to ask you this question. Okay. The role of the finishing class in your blending program, the season of a single barrel. How to utilize them in the season of a single barrel. So tell us a little bit about your single barrel program, and then we'll go from there. I don't want to keep you all night. I know we've already been running for a minute. I know you got things to do. So, but I have to do that. Chris will be on my ass if I don't. So
please, no, I'm glad you asked. So, our basically, each season of single barrels, we call them seasons. That there's no real word for this because no one else is really doing this process. But each season for us is the initial blend that we then recask into different barrel types. And what's really fun about that process is if the liquor store in Boston buys a single barrel from us, it's a one-of-one whiskey in the sense that if you do a single barrel of Buffalo Trace, and they're great Buffalo Trace single barrels, if you do a single barrel of Buffalo Trace, it's Buffalo Trace. It's just a single barrel of it, right? There is a shelf-stable product that they have that is very similar to what you're buying. That tends to be the way it works. Well, each season of single barrels that we do is a unique blend. We don't make anything like it, right? So, and then on top of it, we're doing different finishing casks for all of the whiskey within the season. So your sherry cask finish is going to be completely different than the port finish that the guy did, across the way. These are two whiskeys that have a somewhat similar through line to each other, perhaps, but they've had 6 months of aging that, or more or less or whatever it is, than the other barrel, and it's a completely different barrel. It's a different type of wood. It's a different type of finishing cask, and so the fun thing for us with that is, I think when you're creating a blend, and Helldiver's to your point, is pretty far out. Like Helldiver tastes like a bourbon that has some Scotch influence. It tastes like kind of its own thing. But batch 5 and batch 10 are pretty bourbon adjacent, and that's intentional, right? When people buy our batches, I'm not trying to make something that has no frame of reference for them. If you make chips, I'm not trying to give you, a quesadilla. We're trying to stay in the realm of what people are familiar with. And so batch 10 is its own riff of, say, a wheated bourbon. When we do the single barrels, we have a lot more freedom to make things that are a little bit more stretching the profile of what people are used to.
Right.
Taking a rye and putting it into an Ardbeg cask. Yeah, it's a rye and it tastes like rye, but it has the it had the kind of the rock candy note that you get in a really good peated Islay Scotch,
Right.
with just a dusting of smoke, really
Right.
mild, and it was really cool. I mean, it was really
I
like,
bet.
if you like rye, it's really an excellent version of it. And so each season we get to basically start a whole new project, and we give the buyer the opportunity to sort of match what interesting experiment we've done to their profile and their consumer's profile. And that part of the process is super fun. I my favorite thing to do is actually like go do a club barrel pick with an entire club. So like
Yes.
I flew out to I did a great one last year. I flew out to actually earlier this year, I think. I flew out to Denver for a Denver bourbon club, and they had 50 members show up to the event, and we poured all of the different single barrels that I had available for them for everyone, and then everyone voted and we paid, and it was like that kind of thing is really fun. And to be honest, they didn't pick the one I would have expected, which is great, which is fine, right?
Yeah.
Like I had in my
Absolutely.
mind, I was like, this one's the best one. I think this is the best one. This is the one they're gonna go with, and they picked a different one, and I loved that barrel, but I was like, oh, this is cool. This is matching this sort of unique profile to this unique group.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's that is super cool. That is super cool. You kind of like pressure match each one to each group. So like if I had a group, I'm not saying I do, but if I had a group, how would we be able to do one of these barrel picks?
Easy. Talk to Chris.
Talk to Chris. Okay, I will have Chris's personal phone number at the bottom. No, I'm joking.
No.
Yeah, call him. Make sure it's midnight, and use Debbie as the name. And I'm sure he'll answer. Anyway,
I'm sure he will. That's just funny.
I gotta give him some crap because he's trying to keep this train on the tracks. You know what I mean? So I totally appreciate all of his help as well. All right. Anything else we need to talk about before we get off? I feel like we could sit and talk for hours, and if you don't mind, in a year or so, 6-8 months, I'd love to get you back on just to talk about all the new cool shit you're talking about.
Yes.
Because like, okay, let's talk about batch 10. It's not even out yet. When is that releasing? Am I putting you on the spot?
No. It's until every bottle is in every case. I hate saying when it's gonna happen. You know what I mean? We're literally bottling. We've been bottling for the last few days. So assuming we don't hit any snags, we are weeks, not months away from releasing batch 10. That's how I'll say it.
That's all I need to hear.
Yeah. We'll announce it in the coming 2 weeks probably. We'll say, hey, this is it. This is. And we'll decide in the next 2 weeks if we're doing a lottery or exactly how we're going to sell it. So we'll say, hey, this is it. This is how we're selling it. We've been working really. The last thing I will say is, here's what I'll sign off with. We care as much as I care about the liquid. I and the story, and no joke. I don't think someone can call me out for this if I have missed an email, but I believe I've answered every email ever sent to me by a customer. Email me at nick@foundnorthwhisky.com if you have questions. I will answer them. And I'll give you long-ass questions.
You did that just now.
Yeah, I did it right now. I have answered every email, and if I haven't, it's because I missed it, not because I tried to ignore it. I really think I've answered every email. Because I really believe in I believe in the whiskey, I believe in the brand, I believe in all these things that we've talked about, but they don't exist without the customer and without the community.
Absolutely.
It just doesn't
Absolutely.
exist without the customer and without the community. And so selling the process of buying Found North, we want to be fair, we want it to be transparent, because we just don't want to we don't want our consumer to feel like they got hosed. We don't want the consumer to feel like if they didn't get a bottle, I don't want them to feel like they never had a chance. I want them to feel like it's a fair process. I want them to feel like that we're not getting bots, that we're not. And we have spent the last 3 months, meeting after meeting after meeting with each other internally, but also meeting with some companies about how we can do this better, and how we can give a really, really good experience to the consumer when they're buying our product. And that to me is that to me is like a part of the whiskey. I think it drives me insane how many whiskey brands make some of the best whiskey on the planet, and they just sort of let the distributor deal with it however and they wipe they wipe their hands of it like they don't have anything to do with it. And I'm like,
Buffalo Trace.
I didn't say that. I did not say that. No, but
I said that.
There are a lot of brands where it's like, this isn't our problem. We make the stuff, and the people who sell it. And having been on the retail side of this, where the allocations I was getting were tied to how much fucking vodka I was selling what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like these it's just it's really not cool. That's what I'll say.
No,
and so we don't think that's awesome. And so we really are. We've been trying to make this part of the process. As much as we're trying to make the whiskey better, we're also trying to make this part of the process a lot better. So please sign up for our mailing list, and we'll communicate how we're doing these things. And if you have feedback, give us feedback. And if you want to ask me any random question about Found North, or if you want to ask me a random question about whiskey, shoot me an email. I'll respond.
Awesome. I appreciate that so much, because there's some people that come on the podcast and they're nice and cordial and everything's fine, but they don't want to divulge information that maybe they don't want to talk about, or maybe that they like to stay a little guarded with their stuff. And I feel like you guys are being 100% transparent in everything that you're doing, and it shows in the bottle. It shows in the bottle. This is as much your baby as it is anybody who works. And another thing, just real quick, how many employees do you have in the business as of right? 6. That's it.
6.
Okay. And you guys are selling out in 90 seconds. Like 6, like
6. I that's why it's hilarious when people email with a problem, and it'll be like, oh, we've had a damaged bottle, or whatever's happened in the past, a shipping issue, and they'll email team@foundnorthwhiskey.com, and those emails go to all 6 of us. And sometimes I'm hopping in and saying, hey, I've contacted the retailer who shipped you the bottle. We're really sorry. We're getting a replacement out to you. Here it is. And I'll sign it. I'll say, Nick. And people will go, I just saw you on a whiskey show. Like, why are you answering my email? Dude, there's 6 of us. We do a lot of different things.
And I'll close out by saying this. I can't thank you enough for coming on and just sharing your product and sharing your story, because to me, it's all about the story. The whiskey is great, don't get me wrong, but the story, so much better. And that's what we're about. We're about a good story, we're about a good whiskey, and we're about a good time. And that's I feel like that's what you presented, and I feel like we could be talking for hours, and let's do it again real soon. But y'all, I will have all of Found North stuff down below in the description. Go to their website, make sure you sign up for their mailing list if you want to get one of these bottles, get in their lottery or whatever they're going to do in the near future. Make sure you get on there. and follow, like, subscribe, everything I'm doing as well, because if you're not, you're a loser. But until next time, yeah, I said it. I'm sorry.
No,
Until
that's
next
fine.
time, keep your spirits up, brothers.